MetroWest Climate Solutions is a partnership of local groups who want to speed our path to a healthier carbon neutral world, a partnership that includes a variety of organizations in the MetroWest area. Since 2019, MetroWest Climate Solutions has been holding monthly public meetings and webinars on climate-related issues. Topics have ranged from Beacon Hill legislation to offshore wind to municipal waste. We have been running a series of talks on how climate change will impact New England. Tonight's talk is part of that series. So if you would like to receive news of upcoming MCS events, as well as events hosted by other MetroWest groups, go to metrowestclimatesolutions.org to sign up for our newsletter. Once a month, you'll get notifications of events in the area. We'll put that URL in the chat. Also at MetroWest Climate Solutions, you will find recordings for previous sessions. Speaking of which, this session is being recorded and will be available soon on our website. So, a little administrative information. We encourage your questions. Please type your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, not the chat button. And in that way, all the panelists, the speaker, will be able to see your questions. And we do encourage questions. So, on to tonight's program. Since 1965, Charles River Watershed Association has been the leading voice for a cleaner, healthier Charles River. While the river is significantly improved from its dirty water days, the work is not done, and now we face the growing threat of climate change bringing flooding, extreme heat, more frequent droughts, etc. So it's my privilege to introduce Emily Norton, our speaker for the evening. Emily has served as the Executive Director of Charles River Watershed Association since 2018. She directs a staff of scientists and advocates focused on protecting and restoring the Charles River and its watershed communities. During her tenure, the organization has more than doubled its staff and has expanded its work in municipal climate resilience, dam removal, reducing invasive species, among many other activities. Prior to Charles River Watershed Association, Emily served as the Massachusetts chapter director for the Sierra Club. You should also note that Emily served as an elected city council official in Newton before retiring in 2023, where she led the passage of the Newton Power Choice program, banning single-use plastic bags, restricting the use of polluting leaf blowers, and many other activities. I should say on a personal note that I'm a member of the Charles River Watershed Association myself, as I hope all of you are, or will be, soon. As a member of CRWA fan club, I've been impressed at how Emily has led the organization with both energy and intelligence, serving the community with educational programs and much needed advocacy. So speaking of education, I would like to now turn the microphone and the screen over to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel, so much for that wonderful introduction, which of course I wrote, so I agree with everything. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate Barb reaching out and MetroWest Climate Solutions folks having me here tonight. So I've got some slides that my colleague Danny has loaded up for us, and we will jump right into it. Love that dirty water, how a cleaner Charles River will yield safer, more resilient communities. Have a few slides, and then I'm really excited to take questions and have discussion, because that's always the most fun part. So yeah, and please advance. So first, I'm sure everyone in this crowd knows the difference, but sometimes I like to make sure when we're talking about acting on climate, there's sort of two main areas: climate change mitigation and then climate change resilience or adaptation. And the example I would give is, if you're in a boat and the boat is leaking, mitigation would be preventing the problem from the continuing, which would be fixing the leak. But in the meantime, there's already water in the boat. So resilience or adaptation would be bailing out the boat. So tonight, I'm going to be talking more about resilience. And prior to this, you heard I was the Massachusetts chapter director for the Sierra Club. Prior to that, I was doing consulting. And prior to that, way early on, my first job out of college, I was a recycling coordinator for the city of Burlington, Vermont. That's the photo on the left. The photo on the right was a friend and I going through in the State House dressed as we're fighting the zombie pipelines. But my background was all really in mitigation, and my guess is a lot of the work that you all do is related to climate change mitigation, which is vitally, vitally important. But I'm hoping tonight that you'll have a wider sense of what the resilience work is about and how we really do need to be doing both sides. And there is generally a lot more attention and energy and activism on the mitigation side. This is a climate march in Boston a few years ago, whereas in contrast, on the resilience side, not quite as much. This is a humorous photo that my son took of me the other day. This wasn't really an action, but just to paint the picture of we really don't have as much activism, grassroots activity on the resilience side. So hoping to change that. So quick background on CRWA. As Joel said, we were founded in 1965. We turned 60 this year. And we were founded by a group of residents who did not accept the conventional wisdom at the time that the Charles could not be cleaned up. And we had massive leverage starting in 1972 with the passage of the Clean Water Act. Our mission then and remains to protect, restore, and enhance the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And there are a lot of environmental groups doing a lot of wonderful things. Just so you're aware of where we sit in the ecosystem, we're the only group doing the work that we do in the Charles River watershed. And I know that there are folks, Barb had told me that there's likely to be folks from Lincoln, Framingham, Wayland, Weston, Concord, and Natick on here tonight, and maybe there's additional ones. Of those, they're all in our watershed except Framingham and Concord. And, obviously the work that we do is within our watershed, but a lot of what I'll be talking about, basically all of what I'm going to be talking about is also relevant in those other communities. Please advance, Danny. Thanks. And just so you're aware where we get our funding, I think folks always are interested, and it's an important information for people to have. Most of our funding comes from individuals. So thank you, Joel, for being a member, and hopefully all of you are already or will be inspired to join after this. The other biggest chunk is foundations, and a lot of those are family foundations. So really individuals are our bread and butter. We get some corporate support and some government support, but quite frankly, with everything going on in Washington, we do expect the government support to significantly diminish in coming years. So I'd like to do just some quick background of how we got here. Arguably, the Industrial Revolution started on the banks of the Charles in Waltham. By the late 1800s, there were 43 mills on the Charles between Watertown and Boston, and they caused so much pollution with all the dumping that they were doing that a report at the time said, give up on cleaning up the Charles. Anywhere from Natick to Boston, it's impossible. And this was an article in Harper's Magazine in the 1950s, 1955. It was about Cambridge's Hell's Half Acre Park. But the quote about the Charles, by the time the Charles River reaches Cambridge, it is foul and noisome, polluted by offal and industrial wastes, scummy with oil, unlikely to be mistaken for water. Paints quite a picture, doesn't it? These are some historical photos from 1965, the year of our founding. The one on the left is the Milford Town dump. They literally used the banks of the river as their town dump. And the photo on the right is the dumping of the dye from the Medway Dye Company in the town of Medway. So just some really visceral examples of how we treated the river. Some other examples. Some of you may remember that in the presidential election between George H.W. Bush and Governor Dukakis, that the state of the Boston Harbor was actually a campaign issue. And George H.W. Bush came here and embarrassed Mike Dukakis with the state of the Boston Harbor. So we have come a long way since that time. The big green box here shows how much sewage was going into the Charles River in 1988. But by 2017, as you can see, it was down to 30 million gallons, down from 1.7 billion. So not zero, but much, much better. And then thanks to climate change and larger storms, unfortunately, it has been going up. So that's a campaign we have going on in Boston. So I like to remind people, Dana, you can advance, of the progress that we have made, because environmental concerns can be very depressing and overwhelming. But I think the story of the Boston Harbor cleanup and the cleanup of the Charles and the other Boston rivers shows that extraordinary things can happen when humans put our minds to it. And arguably, the cleanup of the Charles has transformed the quality of life in greater Boston. Danny, you can advance. The Esplanade is a magical place because there's not, blobs of poop, going by you as you're sitting on the banks. Next slide. There's life on the river. We have folks who are involved with us as volunteers and supporters, and they talk about when I used to row in the Charles in the 80s, you didn't see anything alive. Those of you who walk by the river and certainly recreate on the river know that you see life all the time now, and it's amazing and it's wonderful. So in terms of how we do it, our special sauce, when we talk about science, advocacy, and the law, we started a science program in the early 90s, my predecessor, Bob Zimmerman, where we have, and this still happens today, we have dozens of people who go out once a month collecting water quality samples, which we send to the MWRA for analysis. Thanks to this program, we have among the most robust data sets of any urban river in America. And we use that science to drive our advocacy. When we can tell government agencies, well, this is the real state of the river, and we know because of our data, and you're not complying with the Clean Water Act. So we're able to use our science. We're able to use the law. We have an attorney on staff. We're actually about to hire another one. Many watershed groups, in fact, most don't have an attorney on staff. So when we threaten litigation, it's not idle. And that is why the Charles River is one of the most highly regulated rivers in our state and possibly beyond because of the work we've been doing for decades and the approach that we've been taking. I like to do a little aside here to talk about mindset. A lot of the challenge to this work, and I would argue all of the environmental work that we do, is related to mindset, treating the river, treating nature as something just to be used and discarded, as if we weren't part of a wider system. And I love to quote from a book that I highly recommend by a woman named Erica Guys. It's called Water Will Win. And she interviewed indigenous people all across the globe about their relationship with water. And this is a quote from the book. Many indigenous traditions don't consider water to be a what, a commodity, but a who. Many indigenous people not only believe that water is alive, but that it's kin. You protect it in the way you would protect your grandmother, your mother, your sister, your aunties. When you think about that type of perspective and consider those historic photos of how we used to treat the river, it's just really different. I like to think that the work that we do with our volunteers and our supporters is taking that mindset of treating the river as a member of the family and treating it accordingly. The photo is of Hartman Dietz, who's a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. He is a cultural consultant to us and has been incredibly valuable at helping us center indigenous voices of his tribe and others in our work. Danny, you can move it forward. Thank you. So if we were in a group in person, I would make you, I would test you to see who can define what a watershed is. Since we are not, I will just tell you, there's no shame in not knowing. A watershed means anywhere that it rains or the snow melts, whatever body of water that raindrop ends up in is your watershed. We have 28 watersheds in Massachusetts. Next slide. And a close-up of our watershed shows that the river starts in Hopkinton, just like and I know you're saying marathon, but my joke there is that luckily the runners don't have to run the 80 miles of the river. 19 dams still on the main stem. About 1 million people live in the watershed. And we actually have a higher proportion of people in environmental justice neighborhoods than the state as a whole, mostly in the lower basin, Cambridge, Boston area. Next slide. So what are the challenges still going on? We celebrated the success that we've made, but what are the challenges and what are they related to, not just water quality, but also public safety related to climate change? So we grade the river every year. This is our report card from last year, which was taking into account the previous year's data that I told you that we collect. And your area of the river is relatively clean. As you can see from these grades, the middle section, that's basically Medfield to Waltham, gets A minus this year that we were grading. And the lower basin from Watertown to Boston got a B minus. The Muddy River is that C. That's the most polluted tributary that we test. And then the most upper reaches in the 495 area got a B and B plus. The picture that this paints is basically everywhere you have more paved surfaces, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in next slides. Is you have what? Let's stay on that slide, please. Everywhere you have more paved surface, you have more stormwater runoff. So the development around the 495 area, the sort of more developed areas near Boston, those are going to be more polluted. And what does that mean? A B, B minus, B plus, that translates into safe for swimming about 50 to 75% of the time. So it's not zero, but it's not enough for us to reopen Magazine Beach in Cambridge, which is our goal. Our goal of the Clean Water Act was fishable, swimmable rivers. The goal was to get that by 1983, which we didn't exactly do, but we are still aiming for that. Okay, next slide, please. So the biggest threat that the Charles River faces is stormwater runoff. Every time it rains or the snow melts and hits that paved surface, that roof, that tennis court, that sidewalk, everything that is on those paved surfaces, here we have a list: gasoline, oil, heavy metals, trash, et cetera, goes straight into the storm drain, straight into the river, untreated. Next slide. That's where we have the growth of invasive plants in the river that those of you who are kayakers or paddlers experience. Those are bad for recreation. They can make it unsafe. They're also bad for the native flora and fauna of the river. It's not what native animals want to eat, or the fish. It crowds out native species. So invasive plants are really bad for the Charles. Another impact is cyanobacteria blooms, which are not only on the Charles, they're also in lakes and ponds. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Very dangerous. Dangerous for human health, dangerous for our pets. Each year we hear about dogs who go into rivers and lakes and streams and come out, get very sick because they lick themselves. So this is very dangerous. Threat number 2, dams. We still have, as I said, 19 dams on the main stem of the Charles and dozens more on the tributaries. Why are dams bad? Sometimes people think, oh, if a dam has been on the Charles for a long time, it must be good for the river. And we remind people that even the dam that's been on the Charles the longest, the Watertown Dam, has been there since the early 1600s. Okay, 400 years sounds like a long time. The river's been there for 10 to 12,000 years. So anything that evolved with the river did not evolve with a dam. They block fish passage. They warm up the water beyond what's healthy. They change the dissolved oxygen level, sometimes beyond what fish can survive, cause invasive plants, cyanobacteria. So dams are generally bad for the river. It's like a blockage in your artery, right? It's a blockage in the river that's unnatural. And the third threat that I'll reference, which I don't need to tell anyone more about, is climate change. We're experiencing drought. Obviously, we're in a drought right now. We've had more frequent drought since the 1960s. We didn't have any until 2016, and then it's been almost every year. Heat, I don't need to tell anyone that we have hotter winters and summers. When I was a kid growing up in Newton, we didn't need air conditioning. In fact, homes didn't have air conditioning. Businesses didn't have it. Schools, you can't imagine building a home or a school or a new commercial building without air conditioning now. And flooding. Not just sea level rise, not just storm surge, but inland flooding as well. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. So I really just love this slide. So I have a goofy cover in here. What are the wise solutions that we propose in order to address these issues? So stormwater runoff coming from almost every paved surface in the watershed, that is complicated. And if you remember one thing from this whole presentation, hopefully it'll be this slide. On the left, nature. What happens when it's a fully natural system? When it rains or snows and melts, half of the water ends up in the ground, ending up in the aquifer and the groundwater, replenishing the streams and the river. Very little remains as runoff, and the rest goes back into the atmosphere. In contrast, on the right, picture sort of downtown Boston or Waltham or Newton, anywhere where you have mostly paved surface, Most of the water does not end up in the ground because you have a paved surface. Most of it becomes runoff. What this shows is your water quality problems and your flooding problems. So this shows the amount of impervious cover in each community in our watershed. And I put some arrows next to the ones again that I think there might be people here from Wayland, Weston. You can see where your town lies, Natick, and then Waltham going increasingly more impervious cover. You can see the sensitive shows where water quality starts to be affected. And then it starts to be really affecting in the non-supporting area. We also, with each, as the graphic shows, with each 1% increase in impervious cover, we can see annual floods magnitude increase by over 3%. So as you move up the line here, and you can see Somerville all the way on the right. If anyone who's spent any time in Somerville, you know there's a lot of paved surface there. They're going to be more at risk from flooding, and they're going to cause more water quality problems in the river. And the point here is not that you can't have a built environment. The point is how we do it. So what these photos show are different examples of what we call green stormwater infrastructure. So on the left and on the right, we're not saying you can't have a sidewalk, but instead of a regular sidewalk with pavement and maybe a berm that doesn't really, the grass is not native to this area, doesn't really absorb very much water. Instead, you build a bioswale that directs water into the soil and the native plants that are designed for this, directing it away from storm drains. If you can have a series of these in your urban areas, you're reducing the amount of water going into storm drains, reducing pollution, reducing the likelihood of flooding. The photo in the middle is the Ascend marijuana dispensary in Newton, which I had a role in making sure that they held all of their stormwater on site. This is their parking lot that was designed especially to hold in stormwater. Next slide, Danny. So dam removal. Our advocacy there is about removal where it's possible and where there's support from the community. You all may know that the Natick Select Board voted in 2022 4-1 to remove their dam. And on the left, we have a photo of how it looks now. And on the right, a rendering that the town commissioned of how it will look from upstream, looking down. Next slide. Another campaign around dam removal is the Watertown Dam. Again, the photo on the left is how the dam looks now. And the rendering on the right is one that we commissioned in order to give people in the area who they like how it looks now. And so we wanted to give them a sense of it can still be very beautiful. You can still have the riffle. We can put rocks in there so it'll have the sound and the look that people are so excited about. And this dam is owned by the state. And there was an announcement last fall that the state plans either partial or full removal of the dam. So we're super excited about that. And now climate change. I probably don't need to tell you that we are getting more rain and larger, more intense rainstorms, but this shows graphically what that's about. So the top two images show the amount of the growth in the amount of water in the top 1% of storms. And as you can see, the dark blue is where you have the most growth. And in the more recent one, 1958 to 2016, our part of the country has seen the most growth in the amount of water in those most intense storms. The bottom two images show the future. The bottom left is a low emission future, and the bottom right is a high emission future. So in either scenario, we're going to see more intense rainstorms. And I will tell you that we are not ready for that right now. So that's what this is about, is helping people understand. Next slide, please. When we're talking about these issues, sidewalks and preparing and so forth, land use, who's making those decisions? In Massachusetts, it's often your city and town. And so I tell people I didn't seek to have the 2 jobs and the 3 children all at the same time, being a city councilor and being the head of CRWA. But having been a local official has been very helpful for this role. Those of you who are involved in your local government are aware that we are a very strong home rule state. We do not have a culture of making decisions across municipal boundaries. We do not have regional government for the most part. Our elected leaders on the local level are almost all part-time, unpaid, except for Cambridge and Boston. And like as a city councilor, I didn't have staff. I didn't have anyone I could go to say, oh, this stuff is kind of complicated and sciencey. I was a philosophy major. Can someone go research this for me? We don't really have that. So you have people making these decisions with limited capacity. And when things are highly technical, highly sciencey, it's a recipe for disaster. And then particularly who has the least amount of political power in this scenario? Those who are most affected by the heat, by the drought, by the flooding. Next slide. So what do we do about that? We have a three-legged stool. The first leg of the stool is local elected officials. We do presentations just like this one. We call them Climate Resilience 101s for select boards and city councilors. These photos are from pre-COVID. Next slide. Then we moved into remote, and we still sort of do hybrid now. And we just walk people through these issues, and then we talk about some solutions. That's what you see the slide or the graphic on the top left. Various bylaws that they can do, and that CRWA will be helpful with funding, whatever we can do to support cities and towns in these issues. Next slide. The second leg of the stool is the Charles River Climate Compact, which we put together with most of our watershed communities, and you can see who the members are here. And this is the municipal staff. In many of our communities, they just don't have the capacity to be working on these issues. In many of our communities, your town planner is your town attorney, is your sustainability manager. They just don't have the capacity to be working on these issues. So we bring people together across municipal boundaries and to share ideas, to share resources. We help with fundraising, getting grants, and that's been very helpful. Next slide. And then the last leg of the stool is data. You may be aware that many of our development decisions right now are based on FEMA flood maps. Those are decades out of date. They are not being updated, and they were not designed for that. We've had numerous meetings with FEMA. FEMA flood maps were designed to set flood insurance rates. They weren't designed for what people are often using them for now. So we worked with our cities and towns and the consulting firm Weston and Sampson to build a flood model, a computer simulation of where and when flooding is likely to occur with various storm sizes. As you can see, a 2-year, 10-year, and 100-year storm. And all that means is a storm that has a 1 in 2 chance of happening in a year, or a 1 in 10 chance, or a 1 in 100 chance of happening in a year. And then we modeled 3 timeframes: current day, 2030 to 2050, and 2070. And this map is actually on our website, and you can use it yourself. You can plug in your own address. It's only our watershed. So if you're in Concord, you'll have to go to that watershed to see if they have something like that. Part of our advocacy is trying to get the state to do this statewide, but for now, certainly we have it for our watershed. Next slide. And I ran some examples just to give you a sense of what you'll see when you go to it. So this is Weston, a 100-year storm on the left today, or a 100-year storm in 2070. And basically, the darker the blue, the deeper the depth of the storm. So hopefully you can see some areas that you recognize here, around Brandeis and the cemetery. And again, you can play with it on our website, and we will follow up with the link to that. Next slide, please. And this one, same thing. Waltham, 100-year storm today versus 2070. As you can see, there's more blue in 2070, a little bit darker water. Next slide. And then lastly, had an example from Natick. We have projects in all of these communities. But again, just to give you an example of how this can be helpful. Next slide, please. So what we do with the flood model is we work with the city or town to then generate project ideas so that we can reduce the likelihood of flooding in various areas. Not only will this reduce flooding in that specific area, and what that could be is green stormwater infrastructure in a certain area. It could be a massive underground holding tank under a municipal parking lot or athletic field. That will help with localized flooding in that area. It will also help hold in stormwater and keep it from, during storms, rushing downstream. So this is really about what we call taking a watershed approach, because if we're going to be serious about protecting our communities from flooding, you have to take a watershed approach, because the water doesn't respect municipal boundaries. So when we do presentations in Boston, I tell the folks I'm meeting with, you may not think that you have a stake in the decisions made about land use and flood mitigation in Natick and Weston and Waltham, but you do. We're all in this together. Next slide. So something especially at the municipal level, as you think about what you can do in your community. These are examples from my community of Newton because I'm most familiar with it. We know to invest in the public safety risks that we understand. So this is Newton in FY24. Newton's going to spend $26 million on police, $29 million on fire. Next slide, please. But how much is Newton spending to pay someone to have the job of looking at land use and development rules and heat maps and flood maps and setting updated development rules in order to keep people and property safe from flooding? Zero. It's no one's job. It's no one's job in my community. It's no one's job in most of our communities because this is the type of public safety risk that we haven't really caught up with. Climate change is changing the risks and adding more risks, and our public policy and our budgets haven't caught up with that. Next slide. I like to give an example. So New Jersey was hit by Hurricane Sandy, and as a result, New Jersey and New York, they're a bit ahead of Massachusetts in many ways. And this is just some examples of jobs that they have in Hoboken and in Woodbridge Township, New Jersey. They have a chief resilience officer. They have a floodplain manager because they were hit so hard. They know that they need to have someone whose job it is to be looking out for residents and helping make better decisions about land use. Next slide. So what you can do, and again, won't go into every detail on this. This is really a set of resources, and we will be sharing the slides after. On the big level, I would say those of you who are climate activists, to the extent you're able, add climate resilience, as a theme in your advocacy. We have a Water Coalition Lobby Day coming up April 3rd that if you sign up on our website, but we will also follow up with the folks who organize this, and we'll have the information for folks to sign up. We'd love to have you there. And in your community, there's numerous things that you can do. You can ask, hey, whose job it is to protect people and property from flooding? And if the answer you get is no one, well, that would be something to advocate for. Those of you that have dams in your community, we would love to work with you to educate folks and get them excited about removing them. Those of you who don't have a stormwater fee, I know folks don't like to pay more in fees, but it gives a dedicated set of resources to a community so that investing in stormwater doesn't compete with police and fire and schools and so forth. You can strengthen your local wetlands bylaw, stormwater bylaw, tree protection bylaw, pass the CPA, Community Preservation Act, if you haven't already done that. Support the flood mitigation projects that we're working with your communities on. And then there's all sorts of other things you can do related to climate resilience. And we are super excited to be a resource for anyone who wants to do this in their local community. Next slide. So my last two slides. Many years ago, in the 1950s, August 1955, there were two hurricanes, Connie and Diane. They were so huge that they've retired the names. First billion-dollar hurricane in the country, decimated the eastern seaboard, and the Army Corps of Engineers came in. They were like, oh, we got to prevent this type of damage in the Charles River watershed in the future. They were going to spend $100 million on another dam and a set of levees. And instead, my predecessor by two, a woman named Rita Barron, took an Army colonel on a boat ride to the upper reaches of the Charles. Next slide, please. And what they ended up doing instead was just buying up land, over 8,000 acres in 16 communities. If you've ever driven around and seen this sign, you might not have known what it meant. It just looks like beautiful nature, but it holds stormwater, it holds flood water, holds rain during storms, so that it can seep slowly into the ground instead of rushing downstream quickly. And basically, it's a huge nature-based solution. And it's been keeping lower watershed communities safer ever since. And I think most of us have never heard of it. So this is the type of mindset that we need to be having as we go forward so that we can be protecting our communities. And that, I believe, is it. So thank you all so much and look forward to any questions or comments.
Well, thank you, Emily. That was a lot of information, a lot of very
Yeah.
useful information. Your comment about becoming from philosophy to science. I think we all need to become a little bit of a scientist here to really understand and appreciate the importance of these issues. So thank you very much. It's one of those sessions I think it's going to be recorded. We all should watch again. And really,
Yes, I know that is the problem. I know it's hard for me to, it's like choosing among my children, like what not to share, but I think it
oh,
does all come together. And I
it's
mean,
all important.
yeah, and I mean, I look at roads as flood generating machines now, or pollution generating machines. I mean, it really changes your mindset when you really think about how water behaves and
Right.
what we need to do to protect ourselves.
And that was one of my first questions and listening to your presentation. As we know, Metro West needs housing as well. What are your recommendations for how to balance housing with the need to protect our watershed?
That is such an important question, and I'm so glad that you asked that. We do need more housing. There is no question, but we don't want to put housing where we're going to have flooding. And that is a big gap. The MBTA communities law, which folks might be aware of, communities are required to comply with different timeframes. Newton was required to comply at the end of 2023, and I was happy to play a role in our compliance. But the guidance for that law says that a community may restrict development away from floodplains, not shall, but may. We are not helping anyone at any income level if we are housing them in areas that are going to flood. And sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, well, we can put the utilities on the, on the raised floor on the second floor. Are we going to put the cars on the second floor? How, I mean, we do have to take this more seriously than we have. So I would like to think that our flood model map could be used for that purpose, but it will cause difficult conversations. So in my community, you're all helping pay for a new elementary school because it got Massachusetts School Building Authority funding, $20 million. And we are rebuilding the school because it floods. This is the countryside school in South Newton, and we're rebuilding it in the same exact location, which is a former wetland. So I was the only counselor to vote against this project because I don't think it's responsible. And I had people say, well, where are we going to put the school? I said, if there was nuclear waste on that site, we would find a new location. Like, we have to take this seriously. We have to, um, you know, think about the future and just be responsible and make science-based decisions. And it's going to be challenging, but it
Right.
does mean if we're going to be serious about it, then we're going to stay away from areas that are going to flood, and we need to have more density in areas that are not likely to flood. And that is a tough conversation, but it's a responsible conversation.
Right. Yeah, good point. And to stick with that government focus at the time, as you said, many of these issues are being addressed or need to be addressed at the local level. And Barbara asked, are there any particular bills moving through the state legislature that would address some of these issues that you would support?
What a wonderful question. We have an advocacy center page on our website where we have our bills listed. We have quite a few that we have worked with some reps and senators. So one of them there's a couple that I'm particular. I love all of them, but a couple that I'll call out. For folks, you might be familiar with the Green Communities Act. Your communities are probably all participants in that, where a city or town is eligible for more state grants if the city or town takes certain steps related to energy efficiency and fuel economy. Well, we worked with Senator Cream of Newton, no coincidence, to file a bill that would do something similar on the resilience angle. So a city or town that takes certain steps related to climate resilience would have more access to municipal vulnerability preparedness grant funds, the MVP program. So that is one where I think it's fair. It's a partnership, because when a city or town takes certain steps, like requiring more stormwater on site and so forth to reduce the incidence of flooding, well, why shouldn't they be rewarded for that? And another important bill is one that would create a regional government solution. So there are those who say that, for example, the MWRA is already handling drinking water and wastewater. Perhaps they should also be responsible for stormwater. So one could imagine an entity that would play a role with where development would be allowed and with funding. And because otherwise cities and towns are kind of on their own. CRWA, I would argue, is basically acting like regional government, the way we're helping our cities and towns. But we're not, we're a tiny nonprofit. That's really not how a state would be handling these issues in a responsible way. So that will be a big conversation because we know that cities and towns like to not lose control, but I think this is the kind of thing where it's for the greater good. Um, so
Yeah.
those are a couple. We have a drought
Mhm.
management bill that would make it easier for the state to impose conservation measures and a few others.
Mhm.
Yeah, would love help on those, and particularly coming to our lobby day, April 3rd.
Okay. There's an opportunity to contribute right there. Yeah, as you said, a lot of these issues are regional, and I can imagine that treating stormwater or handling stormwater needs to be regional and is could be a very expensive issue. That and going up the government, you mentioned the Clean Water Act, 1972, I believe, and that was, as I understand it, a bipartisan act back in the age when we used to do
Right.
bipartisan work, and the EPA was established. Well, a big question a lot of people interested in the environment are talking about is the recent changes, current changes in the federal government, and in particular, the recent court rulings about the EPA, that what is the authority of the EPA to promulgate regulations and maybe stepping back on that authority of the EPA, and also the recent firings in the EPA. So, any sense of how this may affect issues like you're facing, the Charles River Watershed Association is facing?
Well, it's not good. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Um, what I would say is that CRWA has survived and thrived through, we actually counted them since 1965. LBJ was the president when we were founded. So we have survived and thrived through 11 administrations. And not all of them were friendly to environmental issues. Ronald Reagan was not our friend. If folks remember Ann Gorsuch. Now, I'm not going to say that it's the same as now. Now it's a much wider threat in terms of sort of rule of law. Um, but I am someone with a strong politics background, campaigning background, grassroots background. And one of my favorite quotes is Mahatma Gandhi: when the people lead, the leaders will follow. So when you look at polling data, everyone across the political spectrum supports the environment, supports clean water. In fact, drinking water polls the highest of all. No one is supportive of dirty, polluted rivers. So I think that's on us to make the case, and by us, I mean sort of the royal we, beyond the folks on this webinar, those of us in Massachusetts, those of us in the country, to make the case that we support a clean environment, healthy environment, clean air, because I strongly believe that when we do that, then politicians will follow that. So I don't want to say that this is a mere blip. Like, this is definitely a big deal. We're affected by the pullback on federal funds. If the Clean Water Act, the Supreme Court continues to rule against the Clean Water Act and various provisions and gut regulatory agencies, it's definitely not good. We rely on EPA to do their job. And if they're firing a lot of folks, that's going to be difficult. So I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I am not, I don't want to say I'm not worried, but I'm not despondent. I am like, okay, well, this is the fight ahead of us, is to continue to show why this matters. If you want a swimmable Charles River, you need to do these policies. If you want clean drinking water free of PFAS, you have to do these things and help people make that connection. And I think most people will support that and then pressure their elected officials. So we are still a democracy, and that's I'm holding to that.
I like the hopefulness in your message there. Um, Bill asks, there's been and we've read about this in the Globe, certainly separate stormwater from sewer drains, and separating out the effluents in our systems. Is is there possibility here of this happening, and in particularly the upstream towns?
So the I didn't include those slides because I really do feel like with Zoom time it can just go on, and obviously I went on for quite a while anyway. But in downtown Boston, Cambridge area of the river, there are still very old infrastructure in the form of combined sewer and stormwater pipes. And we don't really see this in the other communities so much. Part of the $5 billion or so that has been spent on the Boston Harbor cleanup, about $1 billion, a little more than $1 billion, has been spent on the Charles. And among that is separating what were previously combined. And they were combined because in the early days of Boston being developed and our cities being developed, it was a big advance to have any pipes at all, rather than just, outhouses and chamber pots. But over time, we've learned that that's not really the best way to do things. And newer cities, in fact, never combined those pipes. So what happens is you have your stormwater coming from the street, your wastewater coming from homes in the same pipe going to the Deer Island treatment plant. But when you have big rainstorms, which we're having with climate change, the capacity of the pipe can't handle all that stormwater. And if you didn't let it release into the Charles, or whatever the local water body is, you would have sewage backups into streets, people's homes and businesses. That's obviously unacceptable. So what we really need to be doing is continuing to invest in updating our infrastructure. There are some areas that sewer separation is not feasible. Sometimes they're very closely attached to the buildings. I mean, these are very old. And so in that case, we have to look at alternatives. So the MWRA, this is kind of hot off the presses in the last couple of weeks, they are proposing a massive underground storage tunnel, like up to 32 feet in diameter, similar to those who followed what happened with Paris and the investments they made there. It would be a massive underground holding tank, basically, that would hold the stormwater during a storm and let it release slowly into the stormwater system to go to Deer Island. So that would be expensive. And so that is what we are in the process of now, is kicking the tires on what they're proposing. Does that make the most sense? In addition to various green stormwater infrastructure investments that could be done in the area to reduce additional stormwater. So we're looking at that. We're going to be analyzing that, and we're going to be realistic about what the costs are. And it could be, they're proposing it might be over $2 billion, which sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of ratepayers in the MWRA system. And it could be over 30 years or more. So we'll be sharing more information on that. But for those who are really interested in that issue in particular, we have something very subtly called the Cut the Crap campaign. If you go to cutthecrapcharles.org, we've got a cool explainer video and ways that you can take action. There may be some folks on the webinar who are rowers in the lower basin and are more familiar with this issue. But there is data that it's really probably not shocking, but it's not healthy to recreate even paddling in water that has had sewage released into it recently.
So that goes back to a question about the grading, the A, B, C, D. If we had such a system in place, does that mean that the C's will go to B's and B's go to A, or is the grading system, it captures different things than the runoff?
Yeah, so the grading system takes into account E. coli, cyanobacteria, and CSO activations. And so over time, as we address stormwater, as I said, is very important. And as we address CSOs, combined sewer overflows, then we will see those grades improve. And in fact, over the years, I didn't include it tonight, but we have a slide showing, the improvement. The year that Governor Weld jumped into the river, if folks remember that,
Yes. Yeah.
EPA graded the river a D. So we've come a long way from those years. Our data shows that there are improvements, and there are areas of the river near North Point Park in Cambridge, near Longfellow Bridge, that are almost always clean enough to swim. Now, we'd still, this, devil's in the details, and you have issues with the sediment that are not, there's stuff in the sediment that's probably not going anywhere. And so we'd have to think about what swimming could look like, and maybe it would be just in areas where people couldn't touch the bottom. I don't know. We don't have those details worked out yet, but I'm excited to be at a point where we could be working on those details. In fact, we met with Michelle Wu's staff, Mayor Wu of Boston's staff, recently, and made the case we would love to work with you on reopening the Charles for swimming when it's appropriate. And what an amazing legacy that could be for her.
Yes. For 2 years, I lived in Cambridgeport, which is right now is a block away from Magazine Beach. He
Next.
mentioned Magazine Beach. I never went swimming in there, but I always thought that one day maybe I would be able to, or my kids would be able to. So it sounds like that, at least on some days, that's a reality.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, and I mean, the harbor beaches, every now and then they close them,
Mhm.
even though they're open for swimming. So it's just not that it would be frequent enough that you could reopen those beaches now. But I'd like to, I mean,
Mhm.
that is still our goal.
And is there any backsliding? I mean, you mentioned when there's a heavy rainfall, and the storm sewers overflow, that's the critical point. But beyond that, or besides that, is there any backsliding in any communities, people going from A to B, B to C, that is just some other particular issue that they're dealing with?
Not really. We're seeing progress, steady progress, in the main stem, but it has kind of stalled. Like we need to deal with the CSOs, with the combined sewer overflows, and we need to keep working on stormwater. Cities and towns do have a mandate to reduce phosphorus pollution. That's the biggest sort of source.
Right.
And it's called the MS4 permit. I could really nerd out on all that. I won't do that. But anyway, it's a mandate on cities and towns to reduce their phosphorus pollution. Another policy, and so that will happen over time, and it's going to cost some money. Another new policy that, thanks to CRWA and Conservation Law Foundation working together to petition EPA, there's a new permit that's just been announced, and we are expecting the EPA to stick to it, even though it was the previous administration that announced it. And this would put a limit on large property owners, anyone with an acre or more of impervious cover. So large commercials or your large universities,
Hmm.
Natick Mall. I mean, things like, that have a lot of pavement. They would have to do, they would have to control stormwater on their own site now in a way that they're not required to currently. So these are coming, and those will help. Otherwise, the Muddy River in Boston is the one that has not made any progress.
Hmm.
And our data shows that most of the pollution from the Muddy, which folks might be familiar with, part of the Emerald Necklace, comes from Brookline. And I can tell you that the folks in Brookline were not aware of that. So that's been fun, but they love it. They love the Muddy River, and they don't want to be contributing. So we're doing a lot of work engaging with the Brookline Green Space Alliance and other Brookline related groups, to be educated and then advocating to their community leaders to make the investments so that we can finally be cleaning up the Muddy River as well.
Yeah, I know in Weston, there's been a lot of concern with overuse of fertilizers in yards. And I know the Conservation Commission has been concerned about this and trying to educate people that they can lighten up on that. We have a lot of wetlands, and so there's that concern too. Um, and you mentioned various permeable surfaces or pavements, and various communities have been trying some of that with their schools and businesses. Is there any other promising technologies like that around the corner?
There are a lot of technologies. I would say that the obstacle, as I sort of referenced, is more the mindset and having people think differently. If the road doesn't have to be so wide, the less pavement, the better. If you can use permeable pavers in a parking lot, that's better. If you can redesign, especially when you're doing a new road or a new sidewalk, that's the time to really invest in a bioswale, the sort of a different way of doing a sidewalk. Certainly when you're redoing a school, um, install the rain gardens, plant more trees. I didn't talk much about trees, but trees hold in stormwater, cool the air, clean the air. Trees are a wonderful green stormwater infrastructure tool. So there really are a lot of opportunities, but if you don't have anyone on staff in the town who's knowledgeable about these, if you don't have pressure from community members, and the example I give is before starting to work at CRWA, I was a city councilor in Newton for 5 years. I voted on numerous road projects, sidewalk projects, building projects without once saying we need more green infrastructure, because I didn't understand, I didn't know about it. So it really is, I think a lot of people would do things differently if they were aware. But we just got to build that awareness.
Yeah, and those are good examples of really working. And we talked about regional issues, state issues, federal issues, but a lot of them are municipal. issues. And you had mentioned a variety of things working with the municipal authorities to implement some of these, or even in the area of education. Do you have, the CRWA have any established channels of communications with these communities, or do you build those communication channels as needed?
Yeah, as I said, our climate compact, our Charles River Climate Compact is the strongest way that we do that because we pull together the municipal staff. I think I should know this. I don't direct the program directly, but I believe it's on a monthly basis, if not more often. And there is a lot of information sharing, and we have been able to work together to get a lot of grants for the communities. Because I'm sure, as anyone knows, who if you even if you serve on a commission, or certainly if you work for a city or town, they're strapped. It's not like
Right.
they've got a ton of free time on their hands. So even when there are grants available, they don't have time to even write the grant and apply for the grant and follow the grant and report on the grant. So we do a lot of that for our community. So we have really terrific relationships, and that's the wonderful staff at CRWA that I just try to stay out of the way of.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate that. Communities are strapped for resources, and in many communities, funding is an issue, and there's a sort of pullback on some of these programs. So it is a challenge in the communities, but my sense is all these communities in your watershed have active, interested, motivated people. They're
Very,
conservation commissions, sustainability commissions, land trust, that hopefully are working with you. And
very much. But I would say, if it, especially like someone who leaves this webinar like, oh, overwhelmed, even the simple reaching out to a select board member and saying, what are you doing to keep me safe from flooding from climate change? And if they don't know, and say, hey, can I connect you with CRWA so they can walk you through some things? That pressure, I'm telling you, as a former ward counselor, when a constituent reaches out about something, there is nothing more powerful. You really don't, you don't want to be non-responsive to that. So we really do need that pressure from the grassroots. Like, I
Mhm.
just went to this presentation, and do you think we're doing enough on stormwater? And they look at you like, what's stormwater? Well, then then we need to do some education. And there's no, well, I just confessed to you, I didn't know anything about this stuff until they hired me.
Mhm.
Really, you can come up to speed at the level you need. You don't have to turn into a PhD. These issues really are,
Mhm.
they are graspable, but it
Mhm.
really does help when we have a chance to sit down with folks and help them, and arm them with the information that they need to take action locally.
Excellent. And that may be a good summary of right there. And then I want to again thank you very much. I started by saying, looking in from the outside, I was impressed as a member of CRWA. I was impressed with your energy and intelligence and insight. And I think you've confirmed that in this really your enthusiasm and your smarts about all of this is really good to know that we have those advocates working in a regional level for us.
Well, we are nothing without our supporters, without regular people wanting to be involved. So please do sign up. Like I said, I'll send follow up on this, but we have our lobby day April 3rd. We have our annual meeting March 27th. We're honoring Governor Dukakis. We've got our Earth Day cleanup. We've got our Run of the Charles. We have a lot of fun things for people to do to be involved. So we'd love to have you.
Great. And I'm on your email list, but we also have the MetroWest Climate Solutions email. We can publicize those events to our 350 plus members
Awesome.
as well as a link to this recording for people who I know a few, including my wife, who couldn't make it and wanted to. So um, they can watch it in later. So I want to thank all the participants and the attendees, and just to remind people that on April 1st at First Parish in Weston, 7 p.m., April 1st, we'll be showing the Innovation District. It's a documentary about Boston and what may happen with rising sea levels in our quote innovation in an inundation district. So please, it's very interesting. I've actually seen it. It's a very interesting documentary, and I recommend it to everybody. So thank you again, and we'll say good night until our April 1st, and after that, our next seminar. Thank you, Emily, again.